2 grueling hours of a filmmaker desperately trying to make the viewers have sympathy for attempted murderers. Gross. Memes are a slippery slope to attempted murder. Stop blaming the internet for why your child does shitty things and take some responsibility. All negative reviews of a 2016 documentary about the hit online sensation The Slenderman. How does a film completely disrespect the victims of a crime and result in an audience with intense moral backlash? Today we will be discussing the dangers of Beware the Slenderman. Our story begins with a group of young friends, Peyton, Anissa, and Morgan. Anissa and Morgan were outcasts at school, only finding solitude in one another as unlikely friends. They bonded over their shared interest in creepypasta and YouTube, like most kids during the early 2010s. Though their shared interest was innocent at first like most kids, unlike most, they had a sinister future ahead. Through their interest in the Slenderman, they read on online forums that it was an option for people to become a proxy of Slender, which can be defined as the authority to represent someone else, though Anissa and Morgan would define it as someone becoming a cult-like worshipper who devotes their life to a cause or a being. They read that as a reward for their loyalty to him, the Slenderman would spare them, their friends, and their family. The girls claim to have only committed such a crime because of the fear that their families or themselves would be hurt.
For the creepypasta, when he said he targets children most, and so I was really scared knowing that Slender could easily kill my whole family in 3 seconds.
Yet despite these claims, the girls' body language and behaviour during their interviews is more telling than their claims.
Do you know what happened to Bella?
What happened to Bella? Is Bella your friend?
She's not Anissa, she's the one who was stabbed.
Stabbed? I'm not really sure.
Is she dead?
I don't know. She was taken to the hospital.
On the night of the crime, the girls set up a plan to sacrifice their other young friend, Peyton. And on May 31st, 2014, the 2 girls lured her into the forest and stabbed her 19 times. The documentary follows this story and the aftermath of the event, depicting the court trial proceeding. The filmmakers set up interviews with the families of the perpetrators as we hear their side of the story, learning how the girls grew up and how they seemed just like your average kid. The first major problematic aspect of this documentary that can be felt immediately is that the interviewees are all family members of the perpetrators. They use archive footage of the girls as babies and their days growing up under a loving household. The mother of one of the perpetrators explains that it was just like any other day.
We woke up in the morning and we had donuts and strawberries for breakfast, and everything was very normal. The girls were laughing and having a good time.
The problem with telling this side of the story is that we just learnt as viewers about the horrible and vile crime the young girls committed. To be then told a relatable story about 2 young girls who grew up just like everyone else feels quite disconnected, as the film seems relatively biased, taking the stance on the side of the perpetrators' families. The documentary tries to make several explanations for the girls' behaviour and presents several motivations for their crimes in attempt to understand why they did what they did. In interviews with the parents, they blame technology and the internet for their child's behaviour, citing that it is the iPad's fault, and all of the false information online is warping children's minds as they cannot tell fiction from reality. But later in the documentary, they disprove their own theory. They conduct several interviews with other young adults and teens who grew up in the early 2000s and 2010s, who all grew up with the influence of YouTube, creepypasta, and other online phenomena. All of these interviewees show no sign of history of violence, aggression, or any other negative traits, despite being brought up in the same conditions as Anissa and Morgan. Speaking from experience as a person who also grew up during the early 2000s alongside the growth of online meme culture, I can safely say that myself and my peers were all aware of these online scary stories from as young as primary school, yet we never fell to any violent tendencies either. I'm sure there is a high chance that even yourself, the viewer, grew up with these phenomena as well and have similar experiences. So what exactly is going on here? Why did these girls fall for this fictional story? This is clearly an isolated event, so what is the cause? Well, believe it or not, the documentary does answer this question, but only in the final 20 minutes of a 2-hour film. They finally reveal that Morgan has a form of inherited schizophrenia. This seems like a crucial piece of information to the story. Why keep this detail hidden from the audience for the entire duration of your documentary, when this one fact gives context as to all the events shown in the film? A lot of these problems would be solved if the documentary was just simply about Peyton, the victim, rather than the two perpetrators of the incident. In fact, the documentary begins by telling Peyton's perspective of the events, how she was left alone in the forest bleeding, crying for help, until she crawled her way to a path and was found by a passerby on a bicycle, who then promptly called the authorities. The tale of Peyton's story is quite honestly fascinating and inspiring, but this is the only time her perspective is shown throughout the entire documentary. To be fair, I think the filmmakers would have told this side of the story if they could have, because I totally understand if Peyton and her family want to stay anonymous and disconnected from the event in order to move forward, but to barely acknowledge them at all seems like a very strange decision. Even if all you could tell me as a viewer is that the family didn't want to be interviewed, at least then I can feel a bit of closure about Peyton's perspective on the event, instead of just simply ignoring it. And quite honestly, this is the only interesting aspect of the story. If you can't tell it, then it's probably not worth telling at all. It quite honestly baffles me how little they acknowledge Peyton at all. Throughout the entire film, they never even establish that she has survived the event. I had to actually do research beyond the film to learn this. It seems like a crucial detail of the story, something genuinely significant to the trial and the narrative they are trying to conceive. On top of all of this, the film does not even really have an ending. The film was made at a time before the trial had even really concluded, so all they have to give us at the ending is some text explaining that Morgan is voluntarily taking antipsychotic medication and is being held at a state hospital. Anissa remains in custody at the county jail for juveniles. Except all I can think during this ending sequence is how Peyton's life must be drastically changed after this event. After some online research, I learnt after the event that she slept with a kitchen knife under her pillow. This would have been a horribly traumatizing event and would change her life forever. Yet we will never learn about her side of the story, at least not from watching this documentary. I think to conclude, I will just leave you with this summary of my review. Something about this documentary just seems irresponsible. Choosing to focus solely on the perpetrators of the crime along with the families comes across as the film trying to make you empathize with these young attempted murderers. They are clearly mentally disturbed, but the film seeks to advocate that they are just like any other kid, and given the right circumstances, any child could commit such an atrocity.